So let's continue with this cross-hero game, and this time we're going to add two more functions, I think, just to make it a little bit better. Because so far what we've got is we've got a cube and it jumps, but it kind of jumps into the sky if we want it to, and also our camera is not tracking and following. So we do know about parenting, and we know if we drag and drop this camera onto our player like this, the camera will follow. But now we've got a couple of issues with this. It sort of looks fine, and it's okay, but I don't actually like how the camera sort of jumps up, and if we are mocking, well, riffing off the original game, it doesn't do that. We've got a more like isometric camera in the main game. So I'm just going to deattach that, so the camera is back to normal now. So you could have messed it up, you didn't have to follow this long, just there you go, we've got that. So what we're going to actually want to do is create a new script. So let's go right click in some space and create a new C# script, which we'll call cam movie. And remember, no space. Don't put any spaces. If you put some spaces in, you're going to have a bad time. And we're going to want to open that up. Now, in fact, we'll just wait. We'll wait. Sure, switch to the .NET framework. Excellent. So we've got our cam movie script. Now this isn't actually going to be complicated. We're going to try and just keep this simple. We've got all of this inside of our main class. Our class is cam movie. All we actually want is when we press the button to move, we're going to want it to follow along, but we only want it to go on a smooth linear axis, not with the ups and downs. So because we're doing input, we know we put input in void update, which means we don't actually need any of this part. We don't actually need any of this part. So our class is only going to involve this update. And like we did before, we're going to change this to a fixed update, so we get consistent frame reading. And this is where we're now going to write our input. So we wrote an input last time, so we shouldn't have to do this. Sort of, probably not. We say if, open brackets, and this is where we say what the if is, what we're looking for. We're just saying we're looking for our input. If input get button, if input get button. What button do we want to look for? Well, let's add some more brackets and tell it. We're going to be looking for fire 1. We're going to be looking for fire 1. Now, we always put a semicolon at the end of our commands. However, this is not a command. What we're asking is a question. So we're going to answer that question. If input fire 1 is pressed, aka if the player presses left mouse button, we want to move the camera a little bit. We want to move the camera a little bit. So let's just do a transform. Let's say transform.translate. Transform.translate, and this is going to be a vector 3. And let's just say, because of our cross axis, so X is horizontal, Y is vertical, Z is that way. So I think we're going to be working on a Z. So let's just say 0, 0, 1. Oh, I put 11. And then let's add a semicolon to this and hit save. Now, whether this actually going to be right, we're going to need to test this out. So let's come back to Unity with that to compile, and we need to drag this cam move on our actual camera. So now if we press play and give it a test. So can we see what's happening? The camera is actually moving way further than the player is, so the 1 is too high. Now, to make this easier, and like we did before in our player movement script, we created a move vector that we could just adjust. So this is where we test our variables, test our knowledge of variables. Here we've got a 1, but what if we wanted to, because 1's too high, so we know we actually want something about like 0.5, let's just say. We know we want something like 0.5. So this is where it comes to actually testing our understanding of variables. So I'm just going to remove that for a second, and let's create ourselves a public variable. Now, a whole number, as we know, is an int. But we're not using a whole number, we're using a number with a decimal point, which makes it a floating point number. I hear you all shouting through your microphones. So we want a public float, which we'll just call, I don't know, cam distance. And let's say it's going to be equal to 0.5 f. So now we've got this. We can, in this space, we can say cam distance. And that's just going to print this number from here. So let's save it and go back to Unity. Wait for this to compile and update. And now if we click on our main camera, we can see we've got this cam distance. So let's press play. Okay, we're still a bit too high. So we could try, I don't know, 0.2. And you can, 0.2 is probably a little bit too low. So at this point, you know, just mess with yours. You know, try and get the distance about the same, so it moves about the same distance. For me, 0.3 looks kind of alright. Looks quite nice actually. This probably needs to go a touch higher for me. But your numbers might be slightly different depending on how you inputted yours and what's going on with yours. So let's next fix the issue of being able to endlessly jump. Also, I'm running my play script on a get button and this on a get button, which means it can constantly be run, but we're going to try and add a limiter to this. So open up your player movement script. Open up your player movement script once you're happy with your camera movement. I mean, feel free to pause the video here and tweak that if you want to. Let's continue. So in our player movement, we want to limit this. And the way we're going to limit this is by asking another question. So we want to limit this and ask another question. Now, in order for keeping things simple now and not looking at complicated operators, we're going to say if input is pressed, we're going to look for another question. We're going to ask the computer another question. So before we do these parts, I'm just going to hit enter a few times and create a bit of space. We're going to ask another question. So I'm going to say if so-and-so is true. If so-and-so is true. Now, so-and-so isn't a thing. Let's make so-and-so a thing. Let's go back to where we were creating our variables up at the top. And let's create ourselves. This can be just private because we don't need to access this publicly. And when we ask a question, we are looking for a yes or no answer. And again, remembering those variables, because that's the essentials, we know a question is a bool, aka a boolean. So a boolean is a true or false question. So we're going to say bool can move. We're just creating one called can move, which by default we'll say is true. So yeah, of course the player can move by default. Why not? Player can move by default, true. So now we can go back to our question and say if can move is equal to true, do the rest. But I mean, this is giving me a squiggly line already. But the thing is, when we type something, so I'm just going to show you for now, I'm just putting my brackets in, my curly braces. Once we jump, we need to set this to false so the person can't keep jumping. So we're going to say this can move is equal to false. So once we do this, we're going to move and then we're going to go, this is false, which means we can't move again until we set this to true again. But notice how we're saying can move is equal to true. Here, we're actually asking the question. We're saying, is can move true? So we actually need to use two equal signs. So we need to use two equal signs for that. So if input is pressed and if can move is true, then we want to do our add fuzz. I'm just going to cut this with Control X and paste it. I don't actually need this debug log anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of that and pretty up my code a bit more. So if button is pressed and if can move is true, then we're going to set can move to false and we're going to add this motion. Now, I don't think it should matter which way we do the other, but let's save it and test it. So what should happen is it should only allow us to jump once. It did. I mean, I held it. I shouldn't have held it. I should have just pressed it. Unless I just change my code to if button is up. Quick note here that when you change a public variable in simulate mode, it doesn't keep the changes. So I need to reset mine back down to, I can't remember what I had it at, 0.3. So the thing didn't move, but the camera still moves because it's not got the same questions on it. Okay, so we know that this system works now, but we need to make it a complete system. We need to make it a complete system. And the way we're going to do this is by resetting this variable. And what we'll do is, traditionally, what you probably want to do is do a collision with the flow. You'd say, if it collides with the flow, set to true. But for now, we're going to do this in a different way. We're going to do this on a delay by calling another function. So we've got these functions or methods. This right here is a method, and this right here is a method or a function. And we want to create a new one. And just setting one up right now is going to be fairly straightforward. We're just going to type in void, and then we're going to name our function, which I'll call jump reset. And then we'll do some brackets, and then we'll add our curly braces. So we've now created a brand new function. And what this function is going to do is it's simply going to do can move is going to be equal to true. So it's just going to reset our variable, and then it's going to allow us to move again. But we need to fire this. We need to call it. We need to call it. But we can't just call it as soon as we've done it. What we want to do is we want to call it on a delay. So we're going to use invoke. Not invite, invoke. We want to invoke. Now, what is invoke? Invoke here invokes the method name in times and seconds. So as you can see, we write it by saying invoke, open brackets, type the string name, and a float time. So we need two things. So we need to open our brackets, and we need to say, what method are we calling? Well, we're calling jump reset. And jump reset, it tells us after we need a float time. So let's just say, I don't know, 0.8. So we can jump every 0.8 seconds. So we can jump every 0.8 seconds. Now I'm just going to save this and let's see if it works. So for the sake of test as well, I'm just going to set my cam distance to 0, so my cam's static, and let's see if this works. So it's now jumping, but not very much. And it doesn't even allow us to press and hold anymore. So at this point, we might want to tweak the actual movement speed. So I'm just going to go back to my player, and I don't know, let's just add more to these. And so see, increase the value, see how it works. But you can see I can't just hammer it now. It's moving at more of a steady rate. And it's fine. I think the values again need to be a little bit higher. So I'm just going to go, I don't know, let's say 120 and 60. Okay, that feels a bit better. Feels like a nicer distance sort of between it. And you know what? This is your sort of version of the game. You play with this however you want to and get the settings just right. You can set whatever numbers you want to. And I'm just going to go back to my camera and turn my camera movement back on as well. And try and marry these back up. You know what, I'm not going to worry about the camera just yet, because I'm going to ultimately have to change it again in a minute. But once you've got your values set up, we are good to go back to this and appreciate all the hard work we've done and essentially rip it off, because we're going to want to copy and paste it onto our cam movement. So basically we're just going to redo it, and so I'm just going to take this function and paste it at the bottom. Now, just to be different, I'm going to call it cam reset, so I know what I'm doing. I need to create my variable again called private can move lowercase can is going to equal true. Don't forget to actually tell it it's a boolean. So that's now true. And then all I need to do is bring the question back in. So I'm going to say, you know what? I might just take this entire part. Yeah, so I'm going to take the entire if statement down to here. This actually, you know what? This might be easier just to redo it yourselves rather than copy and pasting, because that might get complicated. So I'm just going to add some space where it's going to be pasted. Paste. There you go. That's my statement. I do want this line though, because that's which line we're using, and we're not affecting the rigid body. We're using that one. So let me delete you. And instead of this being called jump reset, I renamed it to cam reset, just to be complicated. Right, so I think that's good. So I'm going to save it and test it. I'll leave this on the screen for a second so you can pause it, zoom out a bit so you can see the whole thing. Like I say, if you got errors, it would probably just been easy. We should have just rewritten this out properly. But just to double check your curly braces, you've probably made an error here. Maybe you made an error here. Just make sure you've got all your brackets in the right places. Let's go back to Unity. Make sure I've not got an error by going to my console. It would tell me here. And now I can test this. So at the moment my box is moving too far ahead, so let's go 0.5 and test that out. Now it's working because we can see the transform of our main camera. If you've got your main camera selected, you can see the transform of your main camera moving. But I think I need to go about 0.6 maybe. Ooh, my camera is gaining, I think, on it. I don't know. At this point, just spend a couple of minutes messing about getting those values right. But it is a bit hard to tell when you're just moving like a beige box on a beige box. So I think the next thing we're going to do is bring in some art. Almost made it to the end. And don't forget, when you're in simulate, that value goes back down. So I'm going to go 6.5. And then I'm going to just go File, Save. Awesome. File, Save. And that'll do it for this video, because we've done quite a lot. I think the next thing we're going to do is bring in some artwork.